The political earthquake that was the Democratic National Convention is still reverberating in Chicago and across our national politics. A short time ago, Vice President Kamala Harris departed Chicago, and she had a message before she took off. She heads back to Washington, D.C. with her campaign crackling and turbocharged by that show-stopping final night of programming at her convention, capped off by Kamala Harris's acceptance speech, a speech that not only detailed her uniquely American personal story and her unassailable professional credentials, but also issued a call to action, a to-do list, if you will, for her supporters. It was a speech in which Kamala Harris, the former prosecutor, delivered a scathing indictment of Donald Trump, laying out with surgical precision how Trump has essentially disqualified himself from ever serving as commander-in-chief again.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish, and to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor is back with us in Chicago after a whirlwind of a week at the DNC. Also joining us, fresh off his address to the convention in prime time, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's PoliticsNation and the president of the National Action Network. Also joining us, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly is here. Yamiche Alcindor, there is no mystery anymore about what the objectives were. They were to share Kamala Harris's personal story, establish her credentials in law enforcement as a prosecutor, and it was clear by the end of last night that her commander-in-chief credentials are there. It was maybe to remind people of that, but then to undermine with the speeches from Leon Panetta and Adam Kinzinger and Ruben Gallego and others, and her strong defense of what it means to be an American, to essentially disqualify Donald Trump as not just unserious, but as a serious threat.
That's right. I mean, Democrats came into this convention and what they wanted to do was put on display that this is not just an election about Vice President Harris and former President Trump. It's really an election, they believe, about the future of this country and whether or not you want to be a decent and kind and inclusive America, or where you want to go back to a time when America was not inclusive and where people were discriminated against based on race and gender and all sorts of other identifiers. That was the thesis of this. And of course, the thesis also was joy. They were really leaning into this idea that Democrats are going to be able to usher in a future in America where people can feel hope again, where people can feel good again, where people can feel enthusiastic about the future. And in that speech last night, what we saw from Vice President Harris was really a speech where she laid out her credentials, but she also laid out the personal reasons why she sees the world the way she sees it. And she talked over and over again about her mother. And while she didn't talk about explicitly the fact that she's making history as the first Black woman, first South Asian woman, first woman of color to be at the top of a major party ticket, what she did was show America. And she said, my mother told me, don't let anybody tell you who you are, show them who you are. And in this speech, over and over again, she was showing America, I'm a child of immigrants, showing America, I know what it means to watch your mom spend a decade trying to save money to buy a house. I know what it means to be a prosecutor and see women who have been sexually abused then be re-victimized by a system that might not allow them to have that reproductive health care that they need in order to not continue to be victimized after they were victims of sexual abuse. So she was really tying her personal story with all of the policy positions that a President Harris might enact. And in some ways, it really, I think, underscored, as someone who's been covering her for now more than a decade, it really underscored who she is authentically. And she leaned back into this Kamala Harris for the people. In 2019, I was talking to a source. There were consultants and other people who sort of pulled her away and said, you need to use other phrasing, use other things. This is a speech where she said, I'm going back to my gut. I'm going back to the center of who I am. And I am Kamala Harris for the people. And that's why you saw that speech that way. And I know we're going to hear from Al Sharpton. When you think about who was on that stage, you have, of course, someone like Reverend Al Sharpton, who, of course, is a civil rights icon. You also had a new generation of Democrats coming up. You had Republicans, including former Secretary of Defense and former CIA Director Leon Panetta, saying that this is a national security issue. So it was also sort of this rainbow coalition of people who the Democrats are saying this isn't just about party, this is about country, Nicole.
Rev, let me show you that section that Yamiche is talking about, where she talked about her mom.
My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me a lesson that Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it. Do something about it. You know, our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are.
This was, it's hard to judge what was the loudest applause line, but that was up there, Rev.
No, it was very much up there. I think there were several things going through people's minds when they were listening. One, the kind of of the way people are raised, and they share the human experience that shaped them into being them. You don't hear that a lot from politicians, and certainly not in the age of Donald Trump. I don't think I've ever heard Donald Trump refer to his mother or any lessons he's learned. So I think that it was very significant that this, probably the largest audience, television audience and American audience that she has addressed, gets to know how she was in many ways raised by her mother and what her mother really put into her, the principles. And I think a lot of people could identify with that. And then saying that her mother said, don't make excuses, show people who you are, that she's not coming as this, is being projected by the Trump people, somebody that wants to get handouts or give handouts or comes from that background. She's a self-sufficient, self-standing person that wants to see an equal, an even playing field, but does not want to go into this whole kind of imagery that they tried to project. I thought it was very effective for her to talk about her mother.